President Trump's new executive order takes aim at high prescription drug prices by giving pharmaceutical companies 30 days to voluntarily lower U.S. costs or face tougher pricing regulations tied to international benchmarks. In the Drilldown, Peter Schweizer praises the move as a win for ordinary Americans. He also takes the left to task for their hypocritical outrage over Trump's acceptance of a Boeing 747 from Qatar, while ignoring the $6 billion that Qatar has given to American universities, including over the past couple years. Joining us now is the co-host of that show, Eric Eggers. He's also the vice president of research at the Government Accountability Institute. Eric, it is so good to see you again. Great episode. Again, you guys always put on great angles and put on great, episodes for your audiences. And I only wish you had more episodes every week. But what you guys were sharing on the drill down were fascinating. Talk to us about why the attacks on the pharmaceutical companies in this way is going to actually put them on their heels.
Yeah, thank you, Chanel. Thank you for the kind words. If only I were as hardworking as you, I cannot maintain a daily show schedule, but we do our best to provide the content when we can. On this episode, we actually feel like we were able to combine two stories that seemed different, because on the one hand, here's Donald Trump, and he's doing something that people thought like no one could do. He's standing up to Big Pharma. We played clips on this episode from members of Congress who said, look, Big Pharma is so influential in Washington, D.C. There's a reason why this doesn't get done. We thought it was a really big deal when Joe Biden was able to negotiate prices for 10 of these drugs. And here's Donald Trump saying, no, we're going to stand up and we're going to stop subsidizing big profits for these very powerful drug corporations when other countries are paying a fraction of the cost. So here's Donald Trump on one hand standing up to special interest. And then when it comes to the Qatari plane, people saying, oh, look, here's an example of Donald Trump being for sale, when what is his stance on the Big Pharma story suggests the opposite is true. So that's why we feel like they're related, and that's why we feel like you have to consume all the news in a much broader context than most media shows, not yours, Chanel's, but most media shows presented in.
No, it's such a great point. And both the Qataris and the Big Pharma industry have incredibly powerful lobbyists. How do you think all of that, there's also some parallel lessons that can be found in how they've been, treating and manipulating different administrations up until Trump. They're playing very differently now under Trump because Trump is treating them differently. What say you?
No, I think that's right. In fact, I think it's actually fair to look at, and even the FDA chief has used language when talking about this executive order about negotiating drug prices, comparing it in many ways to the tariffs, right? The whole reason why we're introducing tariffs as economic legislation is we're attempting to rebalance our relationship with the rest of the world. And that's actually exactly what's happening here. It's got less to do with the drug companies. Donald Trump even talked about the drug companies in somewhat sympathetic terms, said these other countries hold them to account in very hostile and unfair ways. And he mentioned these European courts that go after U.S. drug companies, that go after U.S. tech companies, in ways that ultimately only cost American companies their profits.
Yeah, no, the hypocrisy obviously is going to be hilarious to those who remember the positionings of the Democrats just a very short time ago. But such is politics, right? And this other story, though, this parallel story that we're also talking about, the Qatari, jumbo jet swap and all of this, there's even more to the story. Qatar Airways' $96 billion order for up to 210 Boeing jets was announced during President Trump's visit to Doha. It's expected to create thousands of jobs in South Carolina and bolster Boeing's recovery amid ongoing manufacturing challenges. That does not seem like a coincidence, given Qatar's overtures to the Trump administration these days.
Yeah, you talk about how powerful Big Pharma's lobbyists are. Apparently, Boeing's must be like superheroes, because at the end of the day, the whole reason we're even having this conversation about, I'm serious, this conversation about these planes in the fact that Qatar is going to give us this plane is because Boeing is woefully behind on their promise and their contract to deliver 2 new replacements to Air Force One. It's not been a great time for Boeing. We did a podcast last year about how they left those astronauts up in space. And when you wanted to call NASA to see, hey, what's going on? How big of a deal is it? NASA was closed for Juneteenth. And it seemed like Boeing had been way too focused on DEI stuff and less focused on USA stuff. And so you've got a space problem, and now you've got an airplane problem. They're less interested or less able to help the President of the United States get across the world safely. That's a contract that was worth $3.9 billion, and they're years delayed on and massively over budget. But I think good for Donald Trump for not holding them accountable that way. They're still fighting for, it's a massive company. It's very important to American defense and national security interests. Obviously, that plays a big role in terms of economic interest in those plants in the areas that you said. So yeah, and in fact, I think it's even a Boeing old plane that they're getting from Qatar. So they're going to have to get that refurbished, and you found massive deals with new customers overseas. I also think, Chanel, one of the messages that Donald Trump is sending in this Arab trip to these Gulf states is that the United States is open for business with anyone. They are resetting some of the traditional alliances and kind of trade networks. I don't know that Israel is a massive fan of some of the things that have happened lately, but if you listened to Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, they noted that the recent hostage return came despite maybe a lack of cooperation from Israel in trying to help end this war right now. So I think, I'm not saying Donald Trump's playing 4-dimensional chess, but I do think he is in the business of cultivating as much leverage as possible and using it in strategic ways in all the relationships that you have to have when you're president. And this story, I think, is an example of one of those.
Well, that's his strength, right? And that's why Americans voted for him. They believed this is the skill and talent that the world needed at this very moment. So they voted in droves for Donald Trump, the deal maker. That said, I mean, I think this may be reserved for a longer conversation, but in the 70s, we thought that if we played economic ball with China, they would play economic ball with us. The miscalculation there was that the Communist Party was such a backbone to their 100-year plan. It was doomed for failure, back then and even now. But I think this monetary diplomacy that we're playing in the Middle East is a slightly different story, don't you think?
It's such a smart point, Chanel, and I think you're exactly right. Peter and I talked about this recently. I think the engagement in Saudi Arabia clearly has moved them more towards the West, and I think that he's become a much softer line on a lot of things. They become more allies. I mean, just imagine the fact we have a U.S. air base in Qatar. In fact, it was Joe Biden's administration that made Qatar a non-NATO ally officially. We used their air base, and we are doing some things in the Afghanistan withdrawal. So we clearly have strategic partnerships in areas there that our relationships there look very different than they did 2 decades ago. That's absolutely true. And I think economic engagement's been a big part of it. You saw, I think, MBS try to highlight the fact that we have like some shared cultural values with some of the trips and some of the things they've tried to emphasize. And Donald Trump said, listen, we don't want to import our culture to you. We want to do business because of how good you are at doing business in your culture. It's a very different tone, but I think it's one that a lot of Americans agree with right now.
What a fascinating time for geopolitics. I mean, there's just so many changes that I think so many experts would not have foreseen even 1 year ago. Eric Eggers, always an illuminating discussion. The time always goes by way too fast. Thank you.